So I'm representing the World Dodgeball Federation, so the WDBF. The World Dodgeball Federation is a governing body for dodgeball in various forms around the world. So there are a couple of disciplines that are kind of the main disciplines, foam and cloth, but then there are a lot of other disciplines in the sport of dodgeball that different countries have and that have developed culturally over the years. The WDBF has been around since 2011. We've hosted annual world championships from 2012. And of course, with a break in the pandemic, and we are going to be in Edmonton, Canada in 2022 to resume that schedule. We provide support for about 80 members around the world. So some of our federations are very well developed with programming and coaching models, coaching certifications, strong club models. And some of our members are just new. They're starting. They're interested in the sport. Dodgeball is a very kind of accessible and affordable sport. So we have a lot of new members that are just looking to find a way to develop it. And we try to help them out in terms of governance and structure and how to kind of get the sport moving. So our organization is very member-centric. And our overall objective is to gain exposure and support for the sport across the world and trying to get people actively involved at a very grassroots level in play. So as I said, most of our programs are very grassroots focused. We do a few high performance things around world championships and continental championships, but most of the time when we deal with countries, we're trying to actually get kids out and playing and active. So many of our different nations have different accessibility and support for all approaches that we support. One of the things that we're doing, for instance, and I've written about this in the past, is working with Dodgeball Canada to develop a program for Indigenous communities. So in Canada, a lot of the Indigenous communities are a little isolated and they don't always have access to sports training, certification, knowledge infusion into the community. And one of the things that we're working with Dodgeball Canada as we lead up to the World Championships here is to trying to get programs out into the Indigenous communities in Alberta, try to develop a model that works culturally, that works in terms of appropriate ownership, stuff that can be left behind in the community to develop, and then taking that model and trying to apply it elsewhere in Canada where the same need exists. Now, if that model is successful, it's a model that we can translate to be used in any country in the world, when it comes to dealing with communities that are a bit isolated, that are a bit culturally distinct, that might not fit the traditional cookie cutter approach that a lot of countries have when it comes to implementing sport. So this is something we feel is going to have a lot of benefits going forward in terms of getting sport into the hands of people and coaching tools and ownership tools for sport into the hands of people in the community. So as a relatively, I mean, dodgeball itself is an old sport in terms of the concept of the game, and the basic rules of the game has been around for forever and ever. But in terms of a new organized sport, a new developing sport where we're trying to create international structures that are stable, sustainable, it's important that we don't begin with a top-down model. I think we kind of we did begin with a top-down model in the past, 10 years ago, tried to look at, okay, well, let's have a world championship event because that's going to draw attention to everything, and that's going to be an asset that we can kind of use to promote the sport. And I think that was probably the right way to go at the time. But as the sport matures and we have more members come on, going from 10 members to 30 to 50 to 80, it's no longer the proper approach to focus on high performance. Instead, what we want to do is we want to focus on grassroots. We want to focus on community level sport. And in order to do that, we need a sport for all model that is not about the strict traditional long-term athlete development model so much as it's about community participation, inclusion, accessibility, getting people out and active. And so sport for all is going to be the way that we build our sport, because it will be a groundswell rather than a top-down approach. Yeah, and I thought about that question quite a bit. There are a few stories to share, and I would like to share a bit more of a generic level um, rather than individuals. We put together some information while we were trying to develop partnerships a few years ago, and we asked the community that question. Share your story about how dodgeball has changed your life, or that the way our approach to the game and their approach to the game and their approach to this kind of a like new developing emerging sport has changed their lives. And we got a few really good answers, one of which was from two folks who had started an LGBTQ league locally, and talked about how, you know, they always felt that they never fit in. They didn't fit into the mainstream sports mold, you know, had a lot of interest in sports, but had not really fit in there. And then, you know, socially had always kind of struggled with, you know, as they were growing up and going through those teenage years, about where you fit and where you belong and your identity, and how the creation of this league and the attraction of people to the league with similar mindsets, similar experiences, similar backgrounds, what that did to just bolster confidence, community, and sense of belonging. And knowing personally the people who have played in that league, coming back to say that that sense of belonging and community at that very kind of open door level has been amazing. The other story I would share would be when we had one of our first members from Africa approach us. And we talked about, you know, the cost of the sport. And at that time, we were still fairly world championship high performance focused. And the organizer had said to me that the goal wasn't to go to a world championship, although they would love to do that. The goal was to provide opportunity, mostly for young girls, in a lot of the communities where young girls were discouraged from sport. They weren't really allowed to play sport, or they could, but it was kind of off to the side and it was a different thing. And so the whole point of coming into our federation was because they felt that there would be support and encouragement and not pressure to drive towards this, you know, medal level championship formula, but rather that there would be a lot of patience and support for them just getting the game out and getting younger girls involved and getting them, you know, into the arena of sport where otherwise they had not been welcome. And so, I mean, those are two things that stand out. But you know, again, going through that question in the last couple of weeks, that's kind of the foundation for most of dodgeball growth across the world. Is we tend to have a lot of people pick up the sport who, you know, in Canada, where hockey is king and football in Italy and in the UK, you know, we're never going to displace those sports. But what we've become is a bit of a home for people who want to be athletically involved. They want fellowship, they want goals, but they don't always feel a part of the traditional mainstream process, you know. And this is where I think we've done. We have got a lot more to do, and we can do this so much better. But where I think we've done a decent job with our members in encouraging them to take that approach. So Sport for All is really the foundation of how we've kind of developed. And I think without it, if we only had this very traditional view of sport development towards a goal, you know, this kind of own the podium, which is a Canadian thing with the Olympics, but this own the podium mentality, I don't think we would have been as successful as we've been in the last couple of years. Sport for All for us is it's all about inclusion, it's all about access, it's all about opportunity. Those would be the three words, right? For us, Sport for All means giving people a home, you know, giving people a place to belong in sport and activity. Again, you know, we're not an organization that discounts competition, high performance, long-term athlete development, formal structures around coaching. We recognize the value of all of those things very much so, and our members, of course, do, because they that is part of what their goals are in terms of getting their national, you know, recognition and development. But if you were going to ask me, again, simple words, it's about accessibility to sport, opportunity to play, and inclusion for everyone.